afternoon, everyone. I'm Su Qingfang from National Taiwan University, and today I'm going to present our research on lactal variation of the two Chinese causative auxiliaries. And it is today's agenda. First part is the introduction. Next, I will introduce our methods, and after that, the results will be presented. Finally, we will reach a brief conclusion. So what is in a causative construction? Here is an example from our data. And as we can see, this is a causative construction. According to Verhagen and Kammer, causative construction usually contains a causal predicate and a causee. In this case, the causal is 现代通讯科技, and the causal predicate is 是, and the causee is 我们. If we replace 是 with 让, this sentence is also grammatical and comprehensible. So how do we decide the word choice? When do we use 是 and when do we use 让? So we aim to analyze the usages of 是 and 让. According to Verhagen and Kammer, the causative construction can be divided into two types, which is a direct causation and an indirect causation. So we assume that 是 is often used in direct causation, for it often involves inanimate participants, and 让 is often used in indirect causation, for it is often dealt with animate participants. We gather our data from the academic Silicon Balance corpus and the Chinese web corpus for traditional and simplified Chinese data, respectively. After omitting the data that does not form a causative construction, we have 606 data to fit in the model. Next, we annotated our data. We adopt a model of causation types proposed by Croft based on Tommy. The first thing we do is to decide whether the subject is mental. So if the subject of the causative construction can conduct the action on its own, it is a mental subject. So we label it as 1. If the object of the construction can conduct the action of its own, so it is a mental object. We label it as 1. And this type of causative construction is inducive. If the subject of the construction is non-mental, we label it as 0. And if the object is non-mental, it is also labeled 0. This type of the causative construction is called physical. If we have a mental subject and a non-mental object, it is called volitional. If we have a non-mental subject and a mental object, it is affective. This is an example of inducive causation. We can see that in this example, the causer and the causee, which means the subject and the object, are both mental. This is an example of physical causation. As we can see, the causer, which is longevity, is non-mental, and the causee, which is cultural inheritance, is also non-mental. This is an example of volitional causation. As we can see, the causer, which is he, is mental, while the causee is non-mental. Finally, we have an example of affective causation. The causer here is non-mental, and the causee here is mental. After we annotated the property, we decide their transitivity. The transitivity is based on whether the verb after the causal predicate is transitive or not. So it can be either transitive or intransitive. As for the variety, it records the sources of our data. So it can be either CHT or CHS. CHT stands for traditional Chinese, and CHS stands for simplified Chinese. So we feed our annotated data to a logistic regression model. We chose this model because our observations are binary independent. So the logistic regression model helps us classify the discrete sample and identify what variables are useful to our classifying sample. Here is our result. In this table, if the figures of the coefficient is positive, it favors the use of 10. If the number is negative, it is often used with round. Let's first look at the property. We can see that among the properties, only inducive causation favors the use of round. Physical and volitional causation favors the use of 10. As for the transitivity, it seems to favor the use of round, but the number is rather small, so it does not have a huge influence on the word choice. As for the variety, it seems that traditional Chinese is more likely to use round than simplified Chinese. Our p-value is rather small, so it proves that our model is significant. This graph shows the interaction between varieties and transitivities in Chinese. As we can see, in simplified Chinese, both intransitive and transitive favors the use of 10. On the other hand, in traditional Chinese, intransitive and transitive both favors the use of round. In this case, we conclude that transitivity is not a crucial factor that influences the word choice. Let's take a look at this graph. This graph shows the interaction between varieties and properties in Chinese. In inducive causation types, both simplified and traditional Chinese favors the use of round. In physical causative types, both simplified and traditional Chinese favors the use of 10. So we prove that 10 and round is different in the causation types. 10 is often used with direct causation, which involves inanimate participants. Round, on the other hand, is used in indirect causation because it often deals with the animate participants. And in our model, the results show that 10 is often used in physical causation and round is often used in inducive causation. As for volitional and affective, it seems that there's no big difference between the usage of 10 and round. This is my presentation, and thank you.